Morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. Thank you, Sebastian. That was really, really interesting. Mine is on a completely different context, a completely different plane, but that's the joy of coming to the sessions like this. It is intercultural, yes, of course, of course. So I'm Michele Patrick. I'm Assistant Professor of Education at Penn State. I work with world languages education students from the foundation courses all the way through student teaching. And what I'm going to talk about today is a course that I created that we do while our students are studying abroad, and sort of how we're working to connect the in-person lived experiences they have there and how we're trying to use virtual context to help them understand that more, process that a little bit better, and get the most out of those experiences. So just a little bit of what I'm going to talk about, just really briefly about ICC, briefly mediation also, and what the project is like, and then really focusing on the ways that I'm trying to encourage and support in-person intercultural interactions, while our students abroad with the virtual interactions that I have with those students, and just sort of giving some examples of ways that we do that. So ICC, again, we don't really need to talk much about that, using Byram's ideas about that for the most part, reminding us that having intercultural competence, being intercultural speakers, as Byram calls them, is about having critical or analytical understanding of our own cultures and other cultures, and that we are conscious of our own perspectives, and how we understand that our thinking is actually culturally determined and not natural, not like the way. I think this way, so everybody thinks this way. But that we're developing the understanding that that's not the case. And also a little bit from Bennett and Allen about the fact that developing intercultural competence hopefully gives us the ability to relate effectively and appropriately within a variety of cultural contexts. So the cultural context that I am focused on for my work is study abroad. That, of course, is not the only context in which our students can develop intercultural competence, but that's the one that I am working with. So study abroad is really a natural site for that, of course. I don't think anybody would argue that, because we and our students have sustained contact with members of another culture. They have exposure to its practices, involvement in activities, we hope. And so those are some of the ways that our students can develop intercultural competence while they are studying abroad. That all sounds great and lovely and wonderful, and there they go, boom. However, we know that that's actually not really the case. There's nothing magical about when students go abroad that they just suddenly learn all these things that we want them to learn and know. And Cronch really points out that our students don't even really understand their own culture. They've never really been made to examine their own culture or think about the fact that, hey, I have a culture. And so they don't have that, and then they also don't have the knowledge to interpret or understand the experiences that they're having while abroad. And then Jackson, so because of that, then they need to have reflection. They need to understand and reflect on what's happening. And as Jackson points out, that helps them to really think about their lived experiences, revisit those, reflect on those, and understand a little bit more of what it's like to be in the world and how they are responding to the intercultural encounters that they're having, those interactions. So if we want our learners to gain this explicit awareness of culture, both their own and others, then we need to help them in approaching those intercultural interactions reflectively and analytically. And so I do that through mediation. So I mediate their interactions as much as I can virtually. So by mediation, I'm talking about the social process through which we guide learners and their ability to understand and transform their own thinking and their actions. So reorienting and understanding the way that they're acting in the world. And it's a social process. It's a back and forth. This is coming from a sociocultural theoretical perspective. Wirch talks about the fact that mediation co-occurs as we engage in activities with others and as we make use of the available tools that we have towards particular ends, meeting particular goals. And so when we can't mediate in person, I mean, I would love to be able to spend all of my spring semesters touring around France and Germany and Spain and South America and all the places that our students go. That's not realistic, unfortunately. So when we can't mediate in person, then working to do that virtually is what we do through this project. So blogging and video conferencing are the platforms that we use for helping students develop their reflective thinking, their critical thinking, and collaboration also, because keeping in mind that all of this is a social process. However, participation in culture is an embodied experience. It's not just a virtual thing, it's a social experience as well. And that's really important to keep in mind. Excuse me. And we want to help our students connect the virtual learning that they do with us to the actual lived experiences that they're having while they are abroad. So situating intercultural activities within those spaces, within where they are while they're abroad, is vital to increasing their intercultural development, right? Helping them to really interact in particular ways within the culture. And that's what we try to do in the course that we do. Excuse me. So this is a course, of course, for world language education majors. It's taken while they are in their mandatory study abroad semester. Students are required to study abroad for language certification in Pennsylvania. And it's blog and Skype based, or has been. This semester, we're kind of switching platforms to some course management system called Canvas and using Zoom instead, because those are Penn State platforms. I don't think it's going to make any difference in the substance of what the kinds of interaction that we have, but we're going to give them a try. So elements of the course, I'm just going to focus on some of these. There are a lot of moving parts to the course. Students are doing readings, they are responding to blog prompts, and they are having conversations with me and with each other. So they're responding, students are responding to each other, I'm responding to the students, they respond back to all of us. So it's a big conversation around each of the different topics that we cover in the course. And those courses, the topics vary widely. So when they first get there, it's their arrival and culture shock and how are they dealing with being in country. We talk about gender issues, identity issues, things that we want students to think about within a different context while they are the other, basically. There are also inquiry activities and the video conferencing element of it. I'm adding this year a new element to the course where they are connecting with their colleagues in the major who are a year ahead and who are student teaching. So I work with the group who are student teaching and I work with this group, and so we're connecting, we're calling it virtual visitors this year, where the students who are abroad are going to be sharing insights and information with my student teachers' students, high school students, middle school students. So I'm really interested to see how that's going to add another layer to what they're learning and how they're learning how to teach what it is that they're learning while they're abroad. But that's a brand new thing this year, so excited for that. The goals of the course, there are actually multiple goals. These are just two that kind of apply most to what I am talking about for today, are coming back to that idea of mediating and reflecting, just facilitating their collective discussions and reflections on their experiences, prompting them to meaningfully engage with members of the target culture, because we know that doesn't always happen. Sometimes the students stay within their American groups, within their study abroad program groups, and so I'm trying to literally force them, like we talked about, we're forcing them to learn this, to go out and do these things. Wanting them to gain insights about themselves, their own culture, and their host culture. Back to those ideas of they have to learn about themselves as they're learning about the host culture. And of course, mediation towards that. And also facilitating their intercultural, the situated intercultural learning activities and reflection. Okay, so some of the situated intercultural learning activities that we do, the blog prompt activities, there actually are a lot of them. Some of them are related to readings and student experiences, and then some require intercultural interaction. So I'm going to talk in more detail about these as we go on, but these are two that require interaction in some form that students go out and do. Two of the inquiry activities require direct interaction with people with activities in the culture. So they're, again, requiring participation and mediating their relations to the culture. So it's providing opportunities, some structure to the opportunities, but not a whole lot, and then follow-up discussion that's aimed towards students' critical cultural awareness and reflection. Again, this idea of reflection is obviously huge in the course. So just a little bit more on the a couple of the blog prompts that require students to go out and do something. And you'll notice that both of these actually relate to language and culture together, and helping students see how language and culture are related to each other, because that's such an important thing that I want my students to understand. So in the first one, they're going out and they're observing a communicative event that takes place. And they have a whole framework on what it is that they write about. It's Heim's speaking framework. So what's the situation, who are the participants, the roles, and those kinds of things. And then considering how that might have unfolded. So this one, they're actually not, it's not direct engagement with somebody, but it is direct engagement with something, the language, and as we know, observation is an important element of learning in culture, right? We want to observe what's going on around us, so that's getting the students to do that. So I want the students to compare so that they have awareness of both cultures. So they're seeing this language event in their host culture. How might that language event take place in my home culture? And then what are the similarities and differences? And at the end, it's the analysis question. What might account for these similarities and differences? And I asked them specifically, what is it about the culture, what is it about the language that might account for that? And I push them towards asking somebody. If they don't know in their final response back to me, I'll say, okay, who are you going to go out and ask? And then there's that more interaction to try to get more information. The next one obviously is direct interaction or engagement. So students are talking to a native speaker about linguistic variation, and that is something that we have talked extensively about in a prior course that they've had with me. So they reference what we've done before in English, linguistic variation in English, and now they're doing it in their L2, Spanish, French, German. Those are the three languages of my students that I work with. So they're getting the information, pointing out to them and reminding them in all of these cases that they're not trying, like, I don't want them to agree or disagree. I don't want them to change somebody's mind. I want them to just get information, determining what he or she thinks. And again, the idea of looking at, analyzing the similarities and differences to be thinking about their own culture as well as the host culture. Let's see. Yeah, so these are sort of the blog prompt activities that are encouraging the students, requiring the students to go out and get involved with the language specifically and with people, native or expert speakers. I add expert speakers because there might be somebody who lives in their host culture who didn't grow up there, isn't a native speaker, but is an expert speaker, and valuing that as well. So the inquiry activities, two of them that they do are out in the culture. So participatory observation, they're going out and they're actually taking part in some event, and they're choosing what it is that they want to participate in. But specifically, I'm asking them to observe what are the behaviors, what are the norms, customs, interactions, all of those things, anything that strikes them about the context in which they are participating. They go to birthday parties, they go to weddings, they go to, they do sometimes in the doctor's office or on the train station, or in the train station, like participating and sorry, not in the train station for this one. And then reflecting again, asking them to reflect on what it's like there and what similarities and differences have they noticed. And there's another interview that's just more broad at getting to know somebody within their culture, eliciting a biography, including details about the person's life. And again, reminding them that it's not about agreeing or disagreeing, it's not about sharing their own perspectives, but understanding more about this person, who they are individually, and then having the culture come into that. Excuse me. So specific mediation in terms of what I do in the course, or what the instructor does in the course. So this is actually like my direct interaction. So we've been sort of sending them out with everything I've talked about before, and then how do I interact with them around those things. I Skype with them a couple of times throughout their semester while they are abroad, and ask specific questions about their engagement. And again, I'll talk more in detail. And then the way that I respond to them in writing, virtually also, trying to help them connect these experiences to knowledge that they're gaining from reading, to examining underlying assumptions, and helping them get that systematic knowledge that Cromp says is missing. So I'm trying to do those things with the interactions that I have, and helping them interpret and synthesize their experiences. So in the Skype sessions, I ask them just really generally, what have you done to become part of the community in which you are living? Just sort of having them step back and think. And I find at times that they're like, oh, what have I done? Have I done anything? So this kind of draws their attention. You can see some of the things that they've done. So they're in a conversation group, or they're going to concerts, or teaching English, or getting involved with church, attending and sporting events. So they actually are getting involved with the community, and this helps them to think about that. And then I ask follow-up questions. It's way too much data to give like an entire conversation here. But then asking them, okay, so what does this mean for your learning? What have you learned through these things linguistically and culturally? And what groups have they become part of also? Involved in a running group. One person says, actually, I haven't really joined any groups. The way she conceptualized group, I think, was like a formal type of thing. But she has Spanish friends, and she she hangs out with her madre, her host mom, and they kind of think of this in terms of how it is helping their language. So again, the language is the most important thing to them, but what is it in the culture and the cultural interactions they're having that is helping them to develop that language skill? So there's two important kinds of responses when I write back to the students for mediating their development. I try to push their generalization. So I want them to analyze, to think further. I want them to develop a critical stance, basically. And so I'm helping them to try to go beyond broad or stereotypical thinking, because we all have stereotypes, of course, no matter what. So I try to help them go beyond those and think about and involve other people's perspectives. So here's an example, right? A student had described German people, a German person, as someone who drinks beer, speaks loudly, is punctual, keeps to him or herself, talks about politics, and eats a lot of meat. So that's how and he's there in Germany. He was in Marburg, I believe. And I was like, okay, so you say this. I'm like, do these things seem stereotypical? Let's think a little bit more about what it is that you're saying. Have you widely experienced people acting in these ways or doing these things? And then from the other, getting them to think about the other perspective, do you think that Germans would be okay being described in this way? And when he wrote back, he actually said, yeah, I think they would be. So I was like, okay, we can even talk a little bit more about that. But so I'm trying to push and say, think about what you're saying and what you're thinking, and let's delve into this a little bit more. And then the second sort of framework that I use is helping students to think more about underlying beliefs, values, and attitudes in the host culture. So saying that, is that a one? Okay. So I'm wanting to kind of go into the data there, comparing to what people in the US said, trying to push that a little bit. You think they wouldn't mind. And then I'm actually honing in on the individual difference versus the cultural difference and having them try to think about not everybody's going to act the same in the host culture, just like not everybody acts the same in home culture. So conclusion, yeah, good, good timing. Again, we've said we can't assume that our students are going to engage with members of the host culture during study abroad, so sometimes we just need to require them to do so. And I'm lucky to have the platform to do that. If we want our students to engage meaningfully, we need to provide opportunities for them to do so by using the virtual context to encourage and require participation in these activities and supporting participation virtually. So having the kinds of interactions that they're having with me and that they're having with each other. I didn't highlight, but they interact with each other as well. And that helps them to think through some of these ideas also. So that they will be able to relate effectively and appropriately in that study abroad context, but also beyond that, because that's what we want them. We want them to be intercultural speakers and use that, transfer that into their daily lives and their interactions in the world. Thank you.